Hello, today I want to talk about Amazon Prime's new series that launched a couple of weeks ago, The Rings of Power, based on J.R.R. Tolkien's works, including Lord of the Rings. Now, um, this series, which has released only 4 episodes so far, has released a storm of controversy. Most of the reviews being highly negative and a few being highly positive and not too many in the middle. And I want to talk about why. I want to talk about the series that we've seen with 4 episodes so far. I want to talk about the work it's based on, and I want to talk about popular culture today and how it's relevant. Where to start? Where to start? Well, let's start with the basics. There are two types of people that might watch this series. I sometimes say that there are two types of people in the world: those that divide everything into two types, and those that don't. So, going with the former, the two types of people in the world. There's people that have some knowledge about Lord of the Rings already, either because they read the book or because they watched the Peter Jackson film trilogy, came out more than a decade ago. And the people that really don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, they've heard of it, they didn't have enough interest to read it or watch the movies. So Amazon, in the form of Amazon Prime Video, they would want to appeal to both groups, which is a very difficult proposition in the first place. But other movies and series have overcome this obstacle. I would cite, for example, the fantastic series, The Expanse, that was also on Amazon Prime Video, based on a series of novels. I never read the novels, but I would say that that series in film is one of the best science fiction series I've ever watched. Where there's Game of Thrones, which was based on what's his name's novels, which he has never really finished. But Game of Thrones was based on his complicated, involved, detailed series of novels, and they did an excellent job, and they had fantastic viewership. And there are other examples, so it is possible. You can make a movie, or you can make a TV series like The Expanse that's based on a novel or a series of novels, and you can come out with a superior product to most movies or most TV series that people can see, because typically a successful novel has excellent writing, it has an excellent plot, it has engaging characters, it has a detailed, complex plot. It has lots of description. It has lots of stories. The problem in turning it into a movie or a series is cutting it down. You have to find how much of it you can pack into an hour and a half or 2 hours for a movie. Yeah, some movies go longer than that, but I find them hard to struggle through. Or even a series, you can't convey all the depth of complexity of the novel. So all you have to really do is condense it in a way that's adequate for filming. And you've already got such, rich dialogue, such rich characters, such an interesting plot. So actually it's a bonus. But on the other hand, people that read the novel or series of novels, they're always going to find things to gripe about because the movie or the series made compromises. They had to compress timelines, they had to cut out details. Maybe they altered some details for the sake of condensing the story and having it still kind of make sense. So the purists that loved the original writing, they're almost always upset when it's translated into a visual format. On the other hand, if you take someone that never read the original novel or novels, they might be bewildered at first watching it on video. What's going on here? You have to compress so much you don't have time to kind of slowly introduce the story and hook in the viewer. You know, a lot of these stories now, like Tolkien's is a perfect example here. There's thousands of years of history. And how are you going to convey thousands of years of an imaginary world as sort of a background reference when you just throw a new viewer into it with a sort of limited amount of time you can view? Okay, so those are the problems. But on the whole, I'd say when it's well executed, films that are based on a novel or a series of novels really have a big advantage over a film that was based on nothing but a screenplay, or even worse, based on a successful video game. Oh my God, those tend to be the worst, but some of them are actually good too. But you have to just invent the story de novo if you're writing a new script. So Amazon bought the rights to a TV series from Tolkien's universe. They were pretty much limited to a story from the appendices of his trilogy, Lord of the Rings. The appendices have a lot of interesting stuff. It's all prehistory to the 3-volume novel that you would read in Lord of the Rings. So it's not nearly as fleshed out. You don't have the degree of dialogue and all the degree of detail and character development and everything that you have in his novel. So they bought the rights to a TV series based on mainly on the appendices, although they were able to convince the right owners to allow them a few other details. They paid $250 million just for the rights to do this TV series. Now they've spent somewhere over $1 billion apparently in all so far, with the hope of producing a 5-season TV series. As far as I can establish, they've filmed maybe 2 seasons worth. They haven't filmed the other 3. And then they released the first 2 episodes simultaneously a couple weeks ago. And then they're following up with another episode each week. So a week after that, they released episode 3 of season 1. And then the latest one, which was last Friday, was episode 4, season 1. Season 1 has 8 episodes in total. So with episode 4, we're halfway through season 1. And as I say, I think they completed season 2, and as far as I know, they haven't filmed beyond that. Well, if you're going to spend $1 billion and you're Amazon and you own Amazon Prime Video, you want to capture more than that in revenue, right? Current subscribers to Amazon Video don't have to pay anything at all extra to watch this series. So they would want to be able to draw in and then hold a lot of new subscribers to Amazon Video with an annual subscription to make up more than $1 billion. Well, okay, I don't remember how much per year I'm paying for Amazon Prime, including Amazon Video, but it's a lot of new subscribers they need to capture. Unless Bezos just wanted the fame and glory of doing something fantastic. Even so, you at least want the fame and glory, even if you're losing some money on the project. But I don't think he wanted to lose money. So how did this go? Well, from there, music. There were two main, and this is one of the lesser aspects, so I'll start with the lesser and work up. Two musicians that wrote the score so far. Howard Shore. Now he did all the music for Peter Jackson's great trilogy, Lord of the Rings, and it was excellent. So good first choice. But he actually only wrote the main theme, and the majority of the music was written by Bear McCreary. Now he's also a well-established musician for video, and I can't tell you all the stuff that he wrote for, but he has a fairly good reputation. He did the majority of it. The filming, well, it started out in New Zealand, as did Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Fantastic and varied scenery. You really can't ask for a better location if you had to just pick one country to film in. And you wanted great outdoor visuals. New Zealand is about as good as it can get, as Peter Jackson proved with Lord of the Rings trilogy. But then the COVID pandemic hit. It had to stop for a while, and then they finished up in the United Kingdom. Well, the United Kingdom has a lot of great scenery too. Scenery is fine. They spent a lot of money on computer graphics. Most of the computer graphics are gorgeous, although some of it is not as good as it should have been if you're going to spend $1 billion on a production. The writers, now this gets into a distinction that I really hadn't realized before between TV series and like Hollywood movies, because in Hollywood movies there's a clear distinction usually between the writers, the screenwriters, the director, and the producers. And with TV series, they tend to call these I forget, I'm not blocking on the term here, show managers, something like show managers, but they usually do the writing as well as kind of oversee the directing too. So there were two of them. J.D. Payne, I'm sure you recognize that name, right? Here's the other one, Patrick McKay. Oh yeah, another household name, right? Okay. They spent $1 billion. Who do they hire as their script writers? And keep in mind, they can't draw on a lot of dialogue written by Tolkien the way Peter Jackson could. They got to create for basically all the dialogue, as well as put together a plot that makes sense, and a pacing, and how to fill in background and everything. Okay, Payne and McKay worked together on Escape. Bet you watched that one, huh? Flash Gordon. That's not even out yet. Who knows what good it is? Uprising, again, I never heard of it. So they choose as their screenwriters and their lead directors, the managers for this whole production, two people that have virtually nothing to their credit. Would you do that with $1 billion? Okay, New Line Cinema did contract with Peter Jackson, who at the time was a virtually unknown filmmaker in New Zealand, to do the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And since that was a couple decades ago, they put out something like 280 million. He kept trying to pitch the idea for him filming Lord of the Rings as a movie trilogy. He figured it would take 3 films. But he decided, let me just ask for a studio to sponsor film 1, Fellowship of the Ring, because to get them to buy onto 3 major movies from somebody that they don't really know, I probably can't do that. So he went to various studios. He pitched the idea of them sponsoring a first film, and everybody turned him down until he went to New Line Cinema. He gave his pitch, and they said, well, why don't we just do all 3 films? Jackson's like, "Ah, yeah, why don't we? I mean, that's great. Yeah, let's do it. Anyhow, them laying 280 or some $1 million on the line on this relatively unknown director from New Zealand. It's kind of comparable to Amazon hiring these 2 guys that had very little to their credit before to manage $1 billion, because we've had inflation every year. We've had inflation since Jackson's trilogy came out. So the money involved is probably roughly comparable. New Line Cinema took a tremendous gamble, and it paid off enormously for them. Amazon took an enormous gamble with $1 billion, and unfortunately, it's flopping. Sad to say, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay are nothing like Peter Jackson. They do not have the directing ability that he had. They do not have the writing ability he had, although they should have had better writing ability than Peter Jackson and his significant other, who was intimately involved in this, because, as I said, they don't have Tolkien's writing to fall back on. They have to create all the dialogue. It's been a big belly flop dialogue wise. Well, what about who was the director for the filming? Again, with a TV series or a streaming series, the director tends to be under the supervision of the show managers, the Payne and McKay. Well, they hired J.A. Bayona, another household name, right? He was a Spanish filmmaker. He made The Orphanage, that you all know and love, right? The Impossible. Yeah, I never heard of it. A Monster Calls. I know nothing about it. Here's one that we do know. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Now, that was the second film in the Jurassic World trilogy, and it did really well. It was actually grossed 12th highest of all time movies. So they hired somebody that clearly has ability as a director. If only they had allowed him free reign. And my God, if only they had had better writing that he could work with. So the choice of director was okay. The choice of writers ended up being disastrous, and that's a critical flaw. And as I say, the CGI was mostly excellent. The real backgrounds are beautiful. The reviews have been poisonous. I'll go through some of the complaints, and then I'll try to give my views. Complaints, okay, that this changed Tolkien's work to make it politically correct for the 2020s. So you've got to add actors and actresses of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. and whether they belong there or not. So now we have elves and dwarves of seemingly mixed racial ethnicity or background, skin color. How can I say this tactfully? Where the elves, it's Tolkien's elves, they all looked pretty much the same, although they didn't all behave the same, nor were they all at the same level of advancement of civilization, but they were a distinct race of themselves. The dwarves were a distinct race, even though they did have different cultural pockets and histories. But now we have dwarves and elves that visually look different. So some people whined about that as just making Tolkien's legacy politically correct for 2022. My response is, so what? Get over it. In 2022, any movie or TV series that you see that's just coming out, it's going to be ethnically diverse. This is it's facing the reality of our modern multicultural world. It's not the world of pre-war England. By pre-war, I mean pre-World War One, when the British thought that they were the God's gift to humanity and destined to rule over all the inferior people. Tolkien grew up before World War One. He was in World War One. He saw combat in World War One. Yeah, where nobles had to work alongside peasants, even though the guy of noble background might have, been a colonel or something, and the other guy was a private. But they were all in the trenches with each other, and that started to break to some degree the cultural and ethnic distinctions that that Britain was subject to up until World War One. Tolkien went through that, but nevertheless, the world that he created had elves that were one race, dwarves that were one race. Okay, we don't live in that world anymore, so just get over it. Why don't you think about the acting of this character rather than their superficial appearance? Are they a good actor? Are they conveying the emotions that you're expecting? Do they have charisma? Do they engage you? So and basically the other what I consider good critics, they don't buy it either. They point to the competition, House of the Dragon, that's showing simultaneously with Rings of Power. Okay, they've got, this was set when House Targaryen was ruling, and yet they've got one of the main lords of the House of Targaryen is played by a African American, can I just say black, actor, and his son, although we haven't seen too much of him, but he's got an important role too, and he's part of the royal entourage or the inner court, and nobody's complaining. Everybody's watching the show. Everybody's seems to be liking it. Maybe it's not going to reach quite as much success as Game of Thrones, but at this point, it may have a bigger audience than Rings of Power. The fact that they've made this one household now multiracial doesn't seem to be an issue for the viewers. It's really, it comes down to the quality of the acting, the quality of the writing, the quality of the dialogue, the quality of the cinematography, all these other things. The purists, they may always complain that you changed anything at all, but newcomers to the series are just going to watch the characters and see if the story's interesting. So that's kind of a bogus argument, I would say. Other arguments, people said it's too slow and boring. Okay, it does start out slow, I'm okay with that. I'm a fan of Tolkien's writing, of his story. I think it's one of the greatest novels ever written. And I think if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's great writing. It's a world classic of fiction. I'm talking about Lord of the Rings. He wrote some other stuff too, The Hobbit and some short stories, but Lord of the Rings is truly a world classic in the English language, and it's worth reading. Anyhow, they said boring. Okay, well, if this was going to last 5 seasons the way they planned, I'm okay with not seeing a huge battle, for God's sake, in episode 2 or episode 3. I'm okay with allowing the series to take a little time, introduce us to the major characters without the pressure of a whole lot of action scenes. In that sense, it succeeds better than, let's say, Game of Thrones, where they threw so many major characters at you that, for me, a simple man, it was confusing. And I had a really hard time keeping track of their names and what role they played in this series. And I know there was a lot of details that just kind of went over my head because there was too much happening too fast. I still watched the whole thing, I watched it all the way to the end, but it was hard to follow. There were too many characters to keep track of all at once. Okay, so Rings of Power doesn't do that. Kind of starts slowly, eases you into the story. That's all right. I don't care about that. I think that's okay. Um, Another thing in his plus, compared to this competitor, current concurrent competitor, House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon, although they don't give TV shows a rating, I would give that a hard R. It's got way too much graphic violence. There's also a lot of sexually explicit references. I just feel it's totally inappropriate for children. I would never put it on for a kid to watch. On the other hand, I was watching, I think it was episode 2 of Rings of Power. My 8-year-old granddaughter was there. She had started out playing on her iPad, but she started watching the show. She's an avid reader. She's also easily scared. She doesn't like to see violent stuff on TV. She really doesn't. There were only 2 moments during the episode where she started to get a little anxious. There were one time she asked me, "Is this character gonna live?" And I said, "Yeah, this character does live," because I know, in fact, she does. And there was one other point, there was a fight going on between 2 humans and this orc, kind of a humanoid beast, evil. And she started to get anxious, and she said, "Can we fast forward?" And I said, even not having watched it yet, I could see that this was just about over. And I said, this is almost over. And sure enough, within, I think, less than 30 seconds, that whole fight sequence was finished. And I didn't have to fast forward. And she continued watching. And the end of that episode, she still wants to see more. So I would say, Rings of Power is more PG-13, sort of appropriate. And she was even younger than 13. It was iffy for her, but I don't think it was harmful to her. Just brought her right up to the edge of her comfort zone, where I would never show her House of the Dragon. So other complaints. Well, the dialogue. I've talked about the dialogue problem. Dialogue is pretty lame. Sorry to say, the dialogue is lame. Okay. At this point, I want to stop, and I've already mentioned that I feel if you never read Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and if you read any fiction at all, you should try to read it. It's truly a great piece of art. And if you never watched Peter Jackson's trilogy, that is a real piece of art in filmmaking. It'll be in film history. But I'll mention out of many, more than a dozen reviews on YouTube that I've already seen about this series, only in the first 2 or 3 episodes. I'll mention a couple that I think are particularly excellent commentaries, and you can learn more than just about Rings of Power here. You can learn something about writing and about filming. Okay. The first one, this is the title of the YouTube video. Just type it in and search on YouTube. You'll find it. Rings of Power's cinematography is awful. Now, clearly, that's written by somebody who has a particular interest in cinematography, movie making, movie filming. He does an excellent job, really. And it's not that long of a video, but he does a great job of showing how they keep screwing up in the cinematography. Stuff that I didn't even consciously realize, probably at an unconscious level, it was influencing my perception of how well I liked or didn't like what I was seeing. But he was able to draw my attention to these little details, right down to like the positioning of two people's hands in an episode, or um, the effect a zoom in had when you had a CGI background and real characters in the foreground, and various other things. Excellent commentary about cinematography as well as about this specific series. Second one, why people hate the Rings of Power. Watching as a writer. This guy is clearly a writer and he knows what he's talking about. He does not have a big YouTube audience, but again, he nailed it so well. The dialogue, just aspects about the dialogue, and pointed out to me how much better they could have been and should have been than what they were. If you're ever interested in being a writer, whether it's for a film or a TV series or a novel or a short story, it's worth listening to this guy's critique. He knows what he's talking about. The third one, I just thought it was amusing. I also like the fact that the reviewer didn't yell. He was easy to understand. I didn't need subtitles to understand what he was saying, and he was funny. He's pretty scathing, but it's called Rings of Power, a cluster F star star K with not so epic. Okay, that's as long as you see on the title in the YouTube screen. But you type that in, even just Rings of Power cluster F star star K, you'll get it. And he gives a pretty funny review with some great voice effects, but he's just fun to listen to. Obviously, all three of these are critical. First two are really good. Actually, all three are good. I'm a little bit still trying to be more favorably inclined to the series than these commentators were. I keep hoping that they're going to do better, or that they could do better if they realize now that they're really turning off a lot of their would-be audience, and that they've got to try to salvage something out of this. Peter Jackson kept on refilming and refilming and refilming, and then adding more bits to it for extended versions. I mean, he tied up those actors for years, and they were happy to be a part of it because they knew that this was a pioneering and great work. Amazon could still take something from things from season 2, which if it's already filmed, they could go back and at least maybe take some set pieces of dialogue between characters. They wouldn't even have to may change the background. Maybe they can just retrieve the background and use that and just rewrite some of the dialogue so that it's not as trite and just more impactful and makes makes more sense. They could rework some scenes from season 2. See, the remaining 4 episodes of season 1 are probably too late to salvage to do anything with, but they could probably patch up season 2, and then if they haven't filmed anything from season 3, 4, 5, and if they're still willing to go ahead with it, despite a lot of dismal reviews, then they could just bring on some new screenwriters. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. Gotta look at their names again. I apologize, Payne and McKay. You shouldn't be the lead screenwriters for this. You need more cowbell. Maybe you can contribute some ideas, but you shouldn't be the lead screenwriters for this thing. It's just not going over. It's not working. I want to see as much as they film. I mean, despite all the deficiencies that I've described here. Yeah, it renewed my interest. It's not so much. It didn't renew my interest in watching more Amazon Prime Video. I'm already a subscriber, and I don't plan on canceling my subscription. Renewed my interest back in Tolkien's original writings. It actually has me looking for a replacement copy of the Silmarillion, which I had long ago and discarded, and other book called Unfinished Tales, which I don't think I ever did own. I owned several versions of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I owned a couple of versions of The Hobbit, the second longest work, and I owned some little things, Farmer Giles of Ham and Leaf and Branch or something like that. But now I want to go back and I want to re-own the Silmarillion and this Unfinished Tales. So yeah, thanks Amazon. You spent $1 billion and you got me interested in buying some copies of Tolkien's original works. But you need to draw in millions more of new subscribers to video, and now you're kind of behind the 8 ball because maybe half the audience that was willing to watch the first 2 episodes are already turned off. It would be hard to bring them back in. Now you would need a lot of positive reviews to get them interested in looking at more of it when they were not happy with the first 2 or 3 episodes. And then you still want to pull in brand new subscribers that never viewed it at all. So they're fighting an uphill battle. It's sad. I really wanted this series to succeed at this point. Even if it remains at this level, I still want to watch it to see how it evolves, because it does evolve. The episodes continue progressing the story. So it's just it is a disappointment that it could have been better. It's never going to be a Peter Jackson film trilogy, and I'm afraid it's never even going to be an Expanse series. But they still have a chance to recover, and it's kind of an interesting story, and teenagers at least can watch it as well as adults. $1 billion, roll the dice. They came up with a snake eyes. Can they do better? Can they do a re-roll? I hope so.